What is going on, everybody? Welcome in. It's another episode of Fantasy Alarm's Meet the Family. I'm your host, Howard Bender, starring today's episode of Meet the Family, none other than the newest member of the Fantasy Alarm family. You can find his work all over those NHL pages, once that season starts back up. But even though right now he's also writing way too early looks at what could be none other than Andrew Dewhirst. Andrew, how are you, man? Great to have you here.
Doing well, thanks, Howard. How are you today?
I mean, I'm all right. I can't complain. Yeah, I could complain, but I'm not gonna. How about that?
I'll take it.
All right. So Andrew, ladies and gentlemen, joined us by way of, I believe it was Friends with Fantasy Benefits, right?
That's right, yeah.
So before we get into the nooks and crannies of Andrew Dewhirst and those Mickey Mouse heads behind you, let's talk about how you jumped into the fantasy realm here. Justin Mason, a common interest between us and you, and I'd love to hear how you got started up.
Sure. I mean, I got started up a little more than 3 years ago today. So I was, I'd been playing fantasy for, the better part of probably about 15 years now. I'd had some interest in, pondering the idea of getting into writing and podcasting and all that fun stuff about 5 years ago. And then I actually remember the moment sitting in, my daughter was just born. She was in the hospital, and I thought I had a little bit of extra time. I was like, you know what, I should just go for it. So I wrote an article, and then sent out a couple tweets, sent one to Justin Mason. I think I sent the other one to, I think it was Ray Flowers at the time. He was still with Fantasy Alarm at that time. Just saying, hey, I've got, I'll build a portfolio, but I'm looking for work. I'm interested. I want to get in. Justin sent me a DM, said, hey, show me some writing. Sent it to him and been doing work for him ever since.
Yeah, nothing better. Justin was, he'll always be a member of the family here. He was doing some writing for us, and obviously other world circumstances, birth of another child, changing jobs, moving into a house. He had to move on back over to, just focusing on Friends with Family Benefits, which I totally get. But what I love over there is that he really gives you guys a home to hone your craft and to really just kind of work it that way. So, 3 years now with Friends and Family Benefits?
Yeah. I mean, for anyone who's interested in getting into this business, he offers you a real service, right? Like you get to come in, you get to write, you want a podcast, you can podcast. Like, you have a long leash to do what you want to do. Because there's not big boundaries. And I mean, some of that comes with its own responsibilities. You're going to have to learn to edit a podcast. You're going to have to learn to proofread. You're going to have to learn to do some advertising. Like, you're going to have to, it's running on its own. But you're doing the work. So, I mean, it really is a great opportunity. You're going to learn a lot of things. And most importantly is you're going to learn if you want to do it or not. Because I think that's the thing that people forget about the most when it's, I want in. So does everybody else. It's an in-demand job. So you're going to have to, first of all, prove it to yourself, because no one wants to hire somebody for 6 months later and go, you know what, this really isn't for me. So thanks, but no thanks.
100%. Yeah, the dedication is really what it comes down to. And you are tested. Like, as an early writer, one of the things that I've always said to people, just write every day. I don't care if it's just a blurb that you post on a blog somewhere. Just as long as you're getting into the habit of making sure that you're working on this every single day, because there is no day off in sports. Well, I guess maybe there is right now, but for the most part, though, there isn't. People are looking for fresh content every single day.
Well, and you got to find your voice, right? Like, unless you're somebody that's just been writing for, since basically you're in high school or something like that, like, you got to find your voice. And that's not easy to come by. I mean, some people will have more than one voice, but I mean, for some people, you also kind of get like locked into that voice, whether you like it or not. Because if you're somebody who writes in a less serious fashion, and you decide you want to write something that's really serious, your audience is not going to really love that, because that's not why they come to you. So, which kind of brings you an appreciation for actual writers who write under ghost names. But I mean, it's real work, right? Like it's not all fun and games. It's a lot of grind for to get into this, and you got to love it.
You definitely need to love it. It's kind of funny that you bring that up. When I was writing over at Fangraphs, I was trying to, bust out all of those, super analytical articles. I know how to break down the numbers and look for the trends. But then I started a series called Kicking Rocks, which was supposed to be comedic and tongue-in-cheek and just, slathered with sarcasm and satire. And I guess, the first couple of articles, I mean, they shredded me in the comment section because they were like, you sound like an idiot. What are you doing? This kind of thing. Yeah. And then other people were like, if you've read any of his other stuff, he's just kind of making a joke, making a point of it. So you're right. I mean, you do get, I'm not going to say you get pigeonholed into your voice, but I mean, you really need to show, if you are going to change, you do need to show a strong contrast in style to at least alert your followers.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've definitely written from all ends of the spectrum. I mean, last year I just wrote a weekly article just called Musings of a Dynasty Idiot, where I just mockingly, it's like, this is the moves I made in a 30-team dynasty league with 50-person roster. So it's like, hey, I dropped this guy. You mock yourself for doing it. You have some fun. You let some people have some fun, and but it's it's work. It's development. It's all kinds of good stuff wrapped in the lens of fantasy sports.
I kind of like that Dynasty Idiot from a perspective of a dynasty. I like that, actually. We might have to start expanding some of our NHL content just to kind of get a couple of pieces of that. I know you do a ton of the DFS stuff for us. Chris Moraes does a lot of the seasonal work that we do, but I think that tracking something like that actually would be very entertaining and just kind of give you that added voice. You have to be analytical when you're talking about, DFS. There's very little wiggle room that the DFS community gives you for sarcasm.
Yeah, most definitely.
What do you mean? What do you mean you were being sarcastic? I played the guy in 80% of my lineups. Now, some of you out there might be wondering a little. I've started off every single one of these live streams with, "How are you doing? How are you getting through all of this?" And I didn't want to shirk that commentary to Andrew, but Andrew, not in the United States. For anybody who doesn't know, Andrew Dewhirst actually lives north of the border in Ontario. And so what I have to ask you there, obviously, are you staying safe? Are you guys in some sort of a shelter in place, situation right now? And how's Canada really dealing with, the COVID-19 crisis?
I think Canada as a whole is dealing with it okay. I mean, we're in a shelter in place. We have been basically for 2 or 3 weeks now. We've closed businesses down to just what our premier, who is like your governor, getting it down to just what's necessary. So, extended employment insurance to those who wouldn't normally qualify, all that good stuff to try to make sure people are taken care of. For me, I work from home anyways. So in some ways it feels like the days are longer. And when I hear people like, I binge watch all these shows, I'm jealous because I do not have time for it. At least not as much time as they do. So, part of me is like, man, I wish I could just be binge watching that, because I'm still working full time. I got 2 young kids. They're home right now. They're home every day. So it's in some ways it's more work than I would normally have.
So work from home. What do you do, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm a consultant. I work for a software company.
Oh, okay. Okay, so then being able to work from home, help with the kids, does your wife work, or is she home with the kids also?
She does her own work. I mean, my wife's a registered nurse. She
Oh,
also does creative things, much like this banner behind me that she made. So, or we made together. So she definitely stays busy and helps out. I mean, it's hard to run a household by yourself. So,
I can't imagine with two small children. How old are your kids?
3 and 5.
Three and
and
five.
2 dogs.
Oh, see, look at that. Now that's like that. Now you're diving into like Matt Sells region here because I believe Sells has a 3 and a 5-year-old as well. He's got one dog. I don't know that does he Sells. Do you have a cat? You can chime in here if you can. What?
I have a 3 and a 6-year-old, a 1 dog, 2 cats, a toad, a guinea pig, and 2 fish.
Guinea pig, toad, 2 fish, 2 cats, 1 dog, a 3-year-old, and a 6-year-old.
Yes.
I think you guys are challenging each other here, Andrew, for most chaotic household known to mankind.
Yeah, it sounds like Matt's got me beat hands down, but I'll let him have that one.
You can definitely let him have that one. Well, all right. So, wife is a registered nurse. She's got to be doing a number of different things. So, obviously, give her all of our thanks and. Give her a nice big socially distant hug from me. Don't just gonna air hug it and say
all
that
right.
that's from your friends down here at Fantasy Alarm. All right, let's dive in here because that's that gold banner behind you there, the Mickey Mouse ears. I've got questions. You originally, before we got on the air, said that you made it. Now all of a sudden we're on camera now and everybody can see it. So now all of a sudden the missus gets some credit here. But are we big Disney fans? Did we gear up for Disney Plus's release here?
Oh yeah, we had it day one. I mean, I've got a 3-year-old girl. All like every other word out of her mouth is Elsa or Frozen. So it's pretty hard to go without. So yeah, I mean, we're as Disney people as they're going to be. I mean, we're not the type of people who are going every year or every other year, or anything like that. But we certainly, I mean, what Disney owns is certainly content that finds its way onto our TV fairly often. You factor in Marvel and Star Wars and all that type of stuff. So there's, something for everyone in there, I would think.
Something for everyone in there, which, I mean, let's face it, though, it gets dominated by the kids. The Marvel Universe stuff, I don't know. Maybe your 5-year-old's into the Marvel comics?
Oh, yeah. He's been into it since he was probably too young to be into it.
Oh.
I mean, he walks around and it's, one day he's Thor or the Hulk or Captain America. It's a revolving door that way.
Well, who's his favorite? I mean, because listen, I'm sure
his favorite's definitely Captain America. Like we've got the big shield over his bed and all that type of stuff. And he's got the costumes. He loves running around in his Captain America costume or his Black Panther costume or Iron Man or whatever it might be. And playing that stuff out, much like I'm sure just about every other 5-year-old boy does. So
5-year-old, I'm 50 and I'm doing that. What are you talking about, man? You can't see me from the lower half here, but I've got my vision tights on, and I'll be going like full vision mode after this. Let me ask you here: does Elsa team up with, or does she fight against the Avengers?
They team up because Elsa just freezes. So there'll be moments in time where I'll be sitting down to watch TV and it's freeze, and now I got to play out the. So
I love it. Absolutely love it. So really, in all honesty, I mean, things kind of haven't changed a whole lot for you if you're working from home, you're still working and you're doing, you're obviously doing less writing now, which is, kind of the bummer.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm doing less DFS right now. Well, no DFS right now. I'm still trying to get some hockey content out. I'm doing some simulated baseball articles as I got into a league with some folks at Fangraphs and some other people who are doing this simulated baseball league in out of the park baseball. So everyone takes over one team and it just runs a day at a time. So you get to manage your team. I ended up with like the Texas Rangers, who I at first glance was like, what a mess this is. Why do I have all these pitchers over 30? This is going to be a disaster. But, you make the best of it. It's a good exercise in actually understanding why some teams might function the way they are. Give it some thought. From my perspective, I really love the strategy of different things and trying to understand what the direction and the long-term idea of like, why are you doing the things that you're doing? So it's a nice exercise that way.
So is hockey your number one sport, or is baseball actually the first love?
Baseball is for sure. I got into this with baseball in mind. Hockey kind of followed it in the, you got to do something all winter and add it in. So fantasy hockey is very much its own beast. Like, it is nothing like fantasy baseball from top to bottom, in that, like, in baseball, everyone kind of plays roto, which has like standard 5x5, or you'll sub out like, a couple of categories, but they're pretty common with like OBP, or you'll do for batting average, or you might sub out like quality starts for wins. You might do saves plus holds instead of saves. But like hockey, it is a massive variety of like what you might see from league to league. So it offers some challenges that way, because people ask you for advice, but you got to have context, because I can't give you good advice if I'm thinking you're playing with goals, assists, power play points, hits, and and shots, but you're actually playing something with like blocks and other categories in place. So it adds for quite a bit of variety. And from an analyst and somebody that takes other people's questions, it really does drive home the value of like, what categories are you doing? What's the size of your league? Because it can be, it can just vary so greatly.
It can definitely, and it's kind of funny that when we talk about that, when we look at like NHL DFS, to me, it's all about stacking the right lines, and you've got that finite set of stats that you're going after. Yeah. If you were to like, let's say you were just to do like a traditional season-long hockey league, so goals, assists, I'm assuming shots would be another thing.
Yeah. So, I run an industry league myself.
Okay.
So there's a Twitter account for the Analyst Elite League. So I've gathered folks from ESPN, folks from RotoWire, some really great folks from across the industry. And I try to keep it to the offensive categories as much as I can, based on the idea of like, I think everyone wants to draft the best players. No one wants to go out and get like that third line grinder who's going to get lots of hits and blocks.
Oh, man.
Because when you watch the game, like personally, I like to see people score. I like to see that portion of the game. Everyone loves hits, but like blocks are kind of boring to me. It's like, okay, you got in the way. Let's add one into that. So yeah, I use goals, assists, power play points, hits, and shots.
And that's it. Just those five categories.
Those five. I try to keep it close to baseball in the idea of like 5x5.
Okay.
So it's usually 5 skaters, 5 goalie categories.
And the goalie categories would be saves, save percentage,
goals against, wins,
shutouts.
Yeah.
Okay.
Shutouts is kind of the dinosaur in it, in that we don't see. The game's evolved since the mid '90s when shutouts happened all the time, but there's still a nice differentiator. So, what would you sub a category in there, or would you consider just leaving it as a traditional category? Yeah, if anything, you would subtract. You'd end up doing 5x4, because there's not really another relevant category to get in there without getting like too much rate stats or too much of things that are more or less the same. Can't glove saves, waffle saves, splits, most badass painted face mask, anything like that? No, that doesn't work that way. Well, on Fantrax, you can probably find it. They have like literally you can put in like fights, like those are all things that you can track on Fantrax if you want to do it. So
games really kind of turned away from that. Like, I mean, I'm turning 50 this year at the end of the year. So I'm an old fart and happy about that. How old are you?
I'm 38.
You're 38.
Well, I'll be 38 this year.
You'll be 38. So, I mean, even in that 12-year differential, because what happened with me was, you know, I was a diehard hockey fan. I don't know if I've ever shared that with you. I was a diehard hockey fan, bananas over the New York Rangers. Yeah. I accepted the fact that they sold their soul in '94 to win the Cup and become Edmonton East, and I was okay with that. What I wanted from them afterwards was to just rebuild. But it's so tough. You can't rebuild in New York. And, you know, all of a sudden we were like, you know, Martin Rashinsky was getting this badass contract. When they ended up trading for Eric Lindros, I tapped out. I was like, I'm done. I can't deal with this. When Eric Lindros is off the Rangers, then I'll come back to the sport. But by the time that happened, we had the strike, and then we had all these rules changes. It's been very tough for me to come back. Like, how is it for you dealing with all of that?
I mean, to follow up on that story, so in '94, I was 12-year-old me was a Vancouver Canucks fan. It really broke my heart. '94. My aunt actually worked for the Canucks chiropractor, so like she would send me like signed programs from like Trevor Linden and Kirk McLean and you know, Gino Ojek and all these guys. So I had all this stuff, and it was like, the Canucks are going to win the Cup. This is going to be great. And then Mark Messier, Brian Leach, Mike Richter.
Took it to 7.
Alexei Kovalev. Yeah. Good series though. I was a big Pavel Bure fan as a kid. So yeah, didn't work out for me, but yeah, I mean, I think the biggest difference sometimes is, I mean, hockey is all you hear about here. So like living in Canada, like I live in a small city called St. Thomas. I'm about 30 minutes from the city of London. St. Thomas is the home of Joe Thornton. Like the arena here is called the Joe Thornton Community Center. He didn't donate any money. They just named it after him. Public money. It's just, here we go, Joe Thornton. You drive into town, you've got Joe Thornton in like Boston Bruin yellow and gold because that's who drafted him. And I mean, that's what it was like growing up for me as well. I mean, I grew up in a small town. But I mean, hockey is like the lifeblood. Like you go anywhere and people are talking about hockey.
Did you play growing up?
I didn't. It's actually the only sport I didn't play growing up, more or less. I started playing baseball probably when I was like 5, 6. Played baseball till I was 18. In high school, I did everything. I played basketball. I ran track. I played rugby. I played football. I was 100% the smallest defensive tackle you've ever seen in your life. But I disrupted that backfield like no one's business.
My mom never signed the permission slip. I was never allowed to play football. Baseball was a big one for me. I grew up playing a little bit of hockey, not a whole lot though. You know, ice time for us was crazy expensive, and my parents weren't getting up at 4:00 in the morning to schlep my ass over to the rink. So
yeah, I mean, more or less the same thing, right? It's like, it's expensive. I mean, what parent wants to, like, okay, it's 3:30, let's get up, let's get our kids out of bed, let's get them to the arena, feed them maybe.
So for baseball, man, what is it? Is it Toronto? Or are you old school Montreal fan?
No, I'm a Tigers fan. I grew up on the Ontario Michigan border. So
okay, are you all right? Are you sure?
Look, as a Tigers fan and a Lions fan, you learn what it's like for your team to be terrible. You just in your blood. It is what it is. I mean, to be fair to the Tigers, we had some good years, right? Like, had a couple trips to the World Series. You know, some good memories there. Lions, different story.
They're terrible, dude. They're as bad as my Jets. I mean, come on. Talk about two lost franchises.
forever lost franchises, it seems. But I mean, it kind of comes down. The good part about it, and this is how I frame it to myself, is that the good news when your team is good is that, you know, it's really fun to watch. The bad news, or when your team's bad, it's cheaper to go to the stadium. There are all kinds of promotions. You get to do all of that stuff and find fun in it in a different way. But at times, like, the Tigers are tough to watch right now. And it's not getting better. Maybe in 3 years they could be competitive.
I don't know. You know, until I hear Paul Sporer talking playoffs, then I don't really look to the Tigers very often. And over at Fantasy Alarm, Ivar Anderson, huge Tigers guy, also believe he's got season tickets, and he's been struggling a lot too.
Yeah, when I wrote up the Tigers for the Friends with Fantasy Benefits draft guide this year, it was like when writing up Jordan Zimmerman as like, this is probably the worst starting pitcher to actually have a job. You might want to own this player if A, you're looking to completely tank your season while still trying to get like some minimum hitting stats.
It's very true. I mean, listen, I'm not gonna take any. That's a very true statement. I mean, if you're tanking, you're fishing off the Tigers, and even some of the young guys, you know. And I look at a guy like Christian Stewart, and I'm just like, you know, there's power potential there, but I mean, this guy will crush you in batting average and strikeouts, like crush you. Yeah,
I mean, if you're looking at that team, from my opinion, you're looking at about 3 players in a 15-team league. You're looking at Nico Goodrum, who's, if you're playing in daily moves, is fantastic to have because he's got eligibility everywhere. So you can get him in just about any day, and at bats are currency in daily moves leagues. Victor Reyes, I think, has some sleeper sitting in there because he might hit over 300. He might steal 20 to 30 bags. So he's a guy that's going under the radar that you can probably get for nothing right at the end of your draft if you need some average and steals, which everyone needs average and steals. And then Joe Jimenez, because guys get saves, right? Like, Tigers aren't getting any worse than they were last year, and Shane Green had like 30 saves in the first half. So you add some strikeout upside to that. You know, maybe you get 20 saves with some good strikeouts. The ERA and the WHIP might not be fantastic, but I mean, he's pretty young. There's some bounce back. Should be some bounce back there.
Is Boyd going to be okay? What do you think about Matthew Boyd this year?
Boyd's going to get the strikeouts, I think. I mean, I never thought Matthew Boyd would be the gem coming back in a David Price trade, but I mean, I think if you're paying Boyd's ADP, you better be thinking he's getting traded someplace by June, July, right? Because like the wins aren't going to be there. The ERA is probably not going to be great. Yeah, you're going to get strikeouts, but you can get strikeouts just about anywhere at this point. So from a fantasy lens, I'm not really buying Boyd from a actual fan perspective. What else do I have?
Well, you know what? How about this one? I'm going to throw a nice little deep sleeper at you because everybody's forgetting about him. And if you got him, like, I mean, if you owned him before the Tommy John surgery, you were like, ooh. Now coming back from it, he wasn't supposed to be making an appearance until the second half of this year. This whole delay to the season has suddenly put Michael Fulmer on a little bit of positive radar there. Or are you just not doing it?
So I don't mind Michael Fulmer. He really needs his changeup, I think, to come back to life because he just doesn't strike enough people out. So like sinker's great. It's a nice home ballpark. But the other thing you have to remember is that defense is really bad, right? Like you're running out Christian Stewart's not great in the outfield either. I'm not even like you're probably have the range of mobility right now that Miguel Cabrera has. So, you know, it's not really pretty. So it's not like the park's good, but the defense isn't great. So from a pitcher's perspective, like, okay, great. You kept it on the ground, but that might just be more singles. Um, I would, whenever possible, I would be avoiding the Tigers pitching staff wherever you can.
I'm pretty much avoiding all Tigers no matter what. I mean, even some of the some of the silver linings that you might have. I mean, yeah, it's just it's a very tough point of the season. So let me ask you here. So if you grow up on the Michigan Ontario border, you grow up a Tigers fan.
Yep.
You grow up a Lions fan. I mean, is sports the direction that you were thinking that this is what you wanted to do with your life? You wanted to be active in the sports industry at some point? I can't imagine you grew up and you were like, man, there's little Andrew Dewhirst at like 8 years old thinking, oh man, if I could just be a software engineer, oh my God, that would be amazing.
If little Andrew Dewhirst at 8 years old thought I could be a software engineer, little Andrew Dewhirst would have a lot more money today than he does. Software engineers get paid. I mean, as a kid, I was that kid who was like, I want to play center field for X, like for my favorite team. And as a kid, the thing to keep in mind in Canada is that the Blue Jays won the World Series twice.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I mean, you can be a fan of anybody you want. If every person around you is talking about how great it is that the Blue Jays are winning the World Series, like, you're on board with that.
Sure.
I mean, the Sky Dome opened right around that time. I remember going to the Sky Dome when it first opened. And I forever call it the Sky Dome. It'll never be that other place. I'm really bad for that. Like, I mean, I remember going to Tiger Stadium, the original Tiger Stadium when I was a kid too, which was always great memories. I remember sitting up in the top deck and it was still great seats. You don't really get that anymore today. But yeah, I mean, I wanted to play center field for my favorite baseball team. I want to be, I wanted to play sports. That was what I wanted to do. As I aged and grew up a little bit, realized maybe that's not in the cards. Didn't know the dedication required. Didn't know. I mean, not to mention I'm like 5'8". There's some hockey players out there that survive at 5'8". Baseball, not so much. So it kind of just was what it was, and you realize, you're kind of missing the ideal gifts to pursue a future like that. So, but I mean, I'm the type of person who I'm not a great 5-year planner. I take things how they go. I try to take advantage of opportunities as they present themselves, make the best of them, and see what comes next.
So what is the what's sort of, I mean, let's just say, what's sort of the end game here? Like, is the end game ultimately if a full-time position in the fantasy sports world, or even just the sports world in general, opens up? Like, let's say all of a sudden you were being asked to be a beat writer for the Maple Leafs or the Canadiens, or I mean, I could put you with the Wings. We can give you the Detroit Red Wings. Talk about Joe Louis Arena and all that fun stuff there.
Well, Joe Louis is no more.
I know. But I'm like, I go to the old school names too.
Yeah, it's still there. I mean, I haven't been to Little Caesars Arena yet. Not much reason to go or watch the Pistons or the Tigers. Is it
really called Little Caesars Arena?
It is, yeah.
Is that better or worse than New Orleans having the Smoothie King Center?
Equal? It sounds.
It's atrocious naming rights.
Well, as you may or may not know, right? The Ilitch family, who owns the Tigers and the Red Wings, also made all of their money from Little Caesars Pizza.
Right. Yeah.
So, like, I get why it's named that way, because you own the building, you put your own advertising on it, but you probably could have come up with something better.
Anything better. Anything. Name it. You know what? I would have been fine with Ilitch Arena and then just have Little Caesars all over the place.
I totally agree. I wish that was the path. I wish more places still did that. I hate the advertised names. Yeah. I feel like we've hit this point in time where it's like, can we just not make everything a walking advertisement, please? Like, is this really selling more pizzas? Is it?
What's worse, naming rights to a stadium or an arena, or the naming rights to a college bowl game?
Bowl games, because there's more. Well, no, there's not more. There's more stadiums, but the bowl game ones are pretty bad. I don't remember what the one is that comes into Detroit, and that tells you everything you need to know. I think
that's like the Motor City Bowl. I think they still call it that.
Is it? I thought that might have also changed to like the Little Caesars Pizza Bowl or something silly like that.
The Pepperidge Farm Cheddar Blasted Goldfish.
The Pepperidge Farms remembers. Cool.
Welcome to Mint Milano Stadium, sponsored by Pepperidge Farm.
Yeah.
Oh, man. All right, so you're not a 5-year planner, but you didn't answer the question. If it comes your way, like full-time in the industry, would you drop what you're doing?
Yeah, I would absolutely consider it if it lined up and it made sense for my family. Okay. So, I mean, I wouldn't say no. I mean, I don't say no to things. That's what I'm really bad at. I look at it and go, oh, can I make that work? Yeah, I can probably make that work. Sure. I'll.
You gotta be careful when you say when you're like that. All of a sudden, the next thing you know, I'm gonna be dumping a whole mess of work on you. Like when this all comes and happens. Like, I mean, imagine this. Imagine, just September. Let's take September for example, where we could be in quote unquote the last, the MLB would be in full swing, NFL would be in full swing, and you could potentially be looking at Stanley Cup playoffs and or NBA playoffs.
I don't see that coming up in September. I mean, if push comes to shove, I mean, if there's anything I've learned from, if you think of Justin Mason as a mentor, you're going to grind it. Learn how to grind it out. Like, because opportunity, like you're not going to ask me twice. So if you got the work and I want to do the work, I better do the work and I better find time to do the work, because otherwise you'll find someone else, because there is literally like a line a mile long of people that'd be more than happy to fill that space in. So
there's a huge long line of people being like, oh, I just want to write football. Can I just write football? That's all I want to do.
I'm sure if you come north of the border, you can find all kinds of people who are like, I just want to write hockey. Can I just write hockey? And you might have to throw in a CFL season in there too, because that's all completely put off. I mean, what are you going to do without your favorite Hamilton Tiger Cats games?
Well, I mean, let's face it. I'm more of a Toronto Argonauts guy, but I don't want to get into that fight with you right now. But I mean, with the boom that we've seen of DFS, and obviously betting is, sports wagering's jumping into that into a huge fray. Like Grey Cup finals, like I can't imagine not doing DFS. I think what we've seen now with the shutdown of sports and the increase in esports, I kind of feel like, and we saw, people doing DFS on Australian rules, football and all of that. So with all of that, I mean, in the end, does this stoppage that we have, does this give a bigger boost to the sports industry, at least the fantasy sports industry, in the sense that everybody's willing to do anything that comes their way?
I think so. I mean, maybe not. I suppose there's the part of like, you can't act like those who run like casinos and those that run gambling sites don't know people are going to bet on anything, and people have always bet on anything. I mean, there was a like competition going yesterday of a guy that said, I'm going to do 2,000 push-ups in like 12 hours or something. And like, there was a lot of people had a lot of money moving on that thing. It was like, all I heard about all day was, I think he's going to make it. People making graphs. Like, this is the pace. It's like bettors are going to bet. And that's just how it is. I mean, in the words of, with it becoming more and more legal, I remember listening to Craig Mish, who you spent some time talking with about betting, saying a few years ago that like betting is the next thing. Like, it's going to take over. Like, you might see some downtrend in fantasy and in DFS because betting's just simpler. It's like, I pick this team. These are the numbers. Sure. And half the people don't know what the numbers mean. So, I mean, house money, I suppose.
Yeah, no, listen, that was one of the things that we definitely talked about when we were doing all the Wager Alarm live streams is that, yeah, I mean, when you think about it, like think about MLB DFS, think about the number of stats that you have to pour through to put together a DFS lineup. Forget about, like all of a sudden it's like to do a cash game lineup, to do a GPP lineup. Now it's like, okay, let me just kind of stack these guys and just kind of, figure it out from there. But I mean, would you rather spend 6.5 to 8 hours, like analyzing all of these split stats, or would you rather just put $50 on the game tonight and, hope they cover?
I mean, from my perspective, I'd rather dig through the stats because I like digging through the stats. I like finding advantage in that way, but I totally get it, right? Like, I mean, look, if there's anything I've learned from playing NHL DFS is that people still kind of do the same thing. Like there was a night I think where like the Maple Leafs scored like 7 times, and if you didn't have like 4 of those players, you weren't cashing out no matter what game you're playing because every like diehard Leafs fan had put like the full roster, just get it in, and it was crazy. You're just left with like, well, you could have done all the strategy, you could have put in all the work, and you were getting nothing in return because
like, thinking you're all savvy with your contrarian New Jersey Devils stack, and they end up winning that game 2-1. But meanwhile, it's Austin Matthews with a hat trick and 4 assists on the night. It's like,
well, those aren't the ones that kill you. You can kind of plan for that, and that'll take out like 10%. But it's when like Andreas Johansson has 3 assists and Jake Muzzin's got 2 goals, and like it's just stacked across the board, and they scored so much that everybody had tons of points, and you're just like, well, you hit 220 on just Leafs.
Yeah, I mean it's like no picking a Coors Field game.
Yeah, no one should have done this, but you did. Good on you.
Good on you. Good on you. All right, so I'm looking at your article right here on fantasyalarm.com. Too early look at the Western Conference playoffs. Now, listen, none of us know when everything's going to start up, and I don't know how many regular season games were left before the playoffs when everything stopped.
Between 11 and 13, I think.
Okay, so it kind of does it make sense for the NHL to just say, you know what, we'll just scrap those games, go directly to the playoffs? Like, how do you see the NHL playing out?
I don't know. Like, the first article I actually wrote 2 weeks ago, maybe, was like, here's how I think all this lays out. I think they start on July 1st. I think they end up running the Stanley Cup playoffs till like September, and then they'll run a quick draft, try to get things started again probably by December. That was under the ideal that they would just take things as they were. I mean, because the problem is that you've got teams with different amounts of games played. So how do you like normalize the points to say like, and in a lot of cases that's going to determine playoff position because some teams are going to be in, some teams are going to be out. Because like those last 2 playoff spots are very much like up in the air. So ultimately, like, I'm not going to be surprised if they run this thing as like a 20-team tournament. I've seen that kicked around, even like every team just run it through a big tournament, which could be fun, where you take like 1 versus 31, 2 versus 30. Well, you'd probably have to break it back into conferences that way so that you don't have, Anaheim flying to, all the way across the East Coast and creating that travel mess. But I think nothing's off the table right now because we just don't know, right? Like, I think July 1 is still, like, I think that's going to be the date. Like, that's Canada Day here. I think you're going to see MLB try to kick off on Independence Day.
Right.
Because it makes the most sense for marketing, right? Like, you've got a whole day. You make a huge deal of it. Everyone's off work if they're not already. And it's really probably a great time to capitalize if you're going to be able to.
I didn't realize that Canada had, July 1st as their day. Yeah, that makes complete sense right there. I mean, I know that, Jim Bowden and I were talking on the show, and, the 4th of July weekend is something a lot of executives have been talking about. Listen, I think that if it does come to that, I mean, I think it'd be really interesting. I love the idea of running out, I mean, are you discounting the season like that has been played already by doing something like that? Or, I mean, if you're going to seed teams, on each side, 1 through 15, 1 through 16, and do it like that, if you were to, kind of seed it like that, so it kind of helps a little, the top teams there. But I mean, I think that would be phenomenal. And you want to talk about something that would make money for the NHL?
Yeah,
that would definitely do it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you don't call it maybe you don't award the Stanley Cup. Maybe you do something else, because I mean, I would still like to imagine that the Stanley Cup is sacred in their own right of like, you got to earn that thing. You are not hoisting that thing up without blood, sweat, and tears. And I think a lot of hockey fans hold that near and dear to, like, it's not just that trophy, like it is the trophy. And it's massive. I don't know if you've ever seen it or had that opportunity. Like,
I got to touch it.
Because I mean, one other small, I know we're starting to run short on time here. One other small piece about like the joy of the Stanley Cup, especially for Canadians, is that a huge portion of the NHL is Canadians. And a lot of people come from small towns. So like I remember when I was a kid, when the Dallas Stars won, Pat Verbeek was on that team. He was from like 15 minutes outside where I lived. Like a friend of mine's cousin, or actually a friend. Yeah, he was a friend of mine's cousin. The Verbeeks are big pig farmers, if anyone wanted to know. But like, you got to go, like people get to go and they get to see it, and it becomes a huge piece of lore. And that's what's really special about the Stanley Cup, in that it goes to like all these small towns all across the country. And I think that's a huge part of why hockey's such a big deal in Canada. Because, everyone wants to see it there. All the players want to be able to bring it to their small little neck of the woods and have, like, you're a legend. I mean, the biggest player, I grew up in a town called Petrolia, which is like 5,000 people. Yeah. But there's two things that anyone knows about Petrolia. One, it's like the original home of oil in North America. And two, the hunters came from there.
Oh, so, as in like Dale Hunter?
Dale and Mark and a couple others. I don't remember their names, as they're lesser known. But, I mean, like, I went to high school with like Dale's son.
Okay.
Dale and Mark Hunter own the London Knights, which is the most successful junior hockey team in anywhere across the world. London Knights are known. That's where Patrick Kane came from. Constantly putting out NHLers. So that's just what everyone knows. It's just, yeah, that's there. And I imagine that's very similar for kids that grow up here. It's like Joe Thornton is more or less Jesus, and everyone wants to be Joe. And I mean, I'm sure a lot of people were heartbroken last year when San Jose didn't win, because everyone here was San Jose Sharks fans for at least that Stanley Cup playoff, because the Stanley Cup might come here. You get that big parade. You get to go see it. So, yeah, that's just kind of how it is.
I love that. Yeah, listen, the fact that the Stanley Cup is held as sacred as it is, I've always loved. When the Rangers did win in '94, Esa Tikkanen showed up at the bar that I would frequent right over by Madison Square Garden. So it wasn't like it was like a long trip for him, but he walked in there and he did like a little tour of a bunch of bars around around there. And so, to see it in person, to know, I mean, listen, it was unbelievable. Like, growing up as a Rangers fan, and like really, my lucky number is 4, and everybody immediately turns to the Yankees for that. And I'm like, no. Tom Laidlaw wore number 4 when I was, young and impressionable, and he was like one of my favorite Rangers. So I totally get that. Perhaps then, if they do run this tournament out, we call it the COVID Cup 2020. Do we give it that kind of a label?
I think there's lots of hockey. I mean, you could call it the Gordie Howe Cup. You could use this as an opportunity for, taking whatever historic player you might want to add in. I'm sure unfortunately, there's enough aging hockey players out there, or that there will certainly be some amount of tragedy that falls in. So, hopefully we can, at the end of the day, use this all as something to turn this into a positive in some way.
And you know what? And there you go. And that's the mic drop moment right there, to actually be able to try and turn what's going on right now into a positive. Andrew Dewhirst, everybody. Like that seriously, I mean, I could probably sit here and talk to you for another couple of hours, but, obviously Elsa and Iron Man are upstairs and they need your attention. And your wife is probably like, for God's sakes, could you please come back up here, because Elsa and Iron Man are driving me nuts. But thank you, Andrew. Thank you so much for taking the time, man. Really appreciate that. And I love all the work that you do. I love the fact that, you're in the chat room, that you're connecting with everybody and really helping out the Fantasy Alarm family. So seriously, man, thank you so much for everything.
No problem, Howard. And again, thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Big thanks to our producer, Matt Sells, for all the great work he always does. For Andrew Dewhirst and Matt Sells, I'm Howard Bender of the Fantasy Alarm. Appreciate you tuning in to Meet the Family. We'll catch you next time.